Have you ever felt like there just aren't enough hours in the day? Or maybe, that time itself feels like it's just speeding up like a treadmill you can't get off.
Oh, absolutely. It's such a common feeling, isn't it? And the usual advice is always find work-life balance, get more productive.
Right. But what if? What if our whole idea of time is actually part of the problem we're trying to fix?
That's exactly what we're diving into. It's a pretty deep question, actually. We're going to look at how things like industrialism, colonialism, they've really reshaped time, turned it into this thing you can measure like a commodity.
A commodity. So, like, time as something to be bought, sold, maximized.
Precisely. We call it the quantitative view of time. Think of it almost like time is just another input in a factory process, something you manage and control for efficiency.
Okay, and you're saying this isn't just some abstract historical idea, it actually affects us day to day.
Oh, completely. It impacts our personal lives, how we work, our stress levels, even huge global issues like, climate change. But, and this is the really hopeful part, we're also going to explore some surprising alternative ways people have understood and lived time, ways that might help us feel more well-informed
Yeah.
and maybe just less crushed by it all.
Less overwhelmed sounds good. So where are these insights coming from?
Well, it's a mix. We're drawing on historical accounts, some really interesting personal observations, different cultural perspectives. The goal here is to give you a kind of shortcut to understanding this complex thing, challenging maybe some assumptions you have about time.
Consider it maybe a panoramic assault on nihilism, as the source material puts it, trying to reframe how we see this fundamental part of life.
Exactly, a hopeful reframing.
Okay, so if our current idea of time is, let's say, part of the issue, where did the specific, measurable, clock-based time really come from? You said the origins might surprise us.
Yeah, they're not where you'd typically look. It actually traces back, quite unexpectedly, to medieval monasteries in Europe.
Monasteries. I wouldn't have guessed that. How so?
Well, these monks, they had their bells, their routines. They developed what's called temporal sensibilities. Basically, a really strong focus on ordering their time, on punctuality, on efficiency. They weren't just praying. They ended up running some of the most, efficient farms and almost factory-like operations of their time.
Huh. So efficiency was key even back then. And they needed ways to track that time precisely.
They did. And they developed these clever clockwork mechanisms for their bells, these escapement-like designs. These weren't just simple alarms for prayer times,
So more sophisticated.
much more. And what started as an internal tool for the monastery, regulating their prayers and their work, it kind of spilled out. As towns grew, this new bourgeois class, merchants and traders, they found these public clocks incredibly useful.
For business, I imagine.
Exactly. For trade, for coordinating work. Clocks help define the outer bounds of the day's worth of labor for people who only had their time to sell. And importantly, unlike the monks' older system where hours varied with the seasons, these new mechanical clocks measured equal, countable hours all year round.
Ah, so that standardization was key for commerce, imposing uniformity.
Right. It was the beginning of time becoming this abstract, measurable thing, a commodity.
Okay, so we see the roots in monasteries, then spreading through commerce. But you mentioned this quantitative view took hold in more troubling ways, too.
Yes, unfortunately.
Yeah.
When you dig into the origins of modern management techniques, well, there's a really uncomfortable parallel to be drawn. It points back to 18th and 19th century plantations in the West Indies and the southern U.S.
That's definitely unsettling. How so?
It's tough stuff, but the historical record shows that slaveholders were incredibly some of the earliest users of what we would now call spreadsheets. They were doing these detailed labor timing experiments.
Experiments on people.
Yes. Trying to figure out the absolute maximum amount of labor they could extract from enslaved individuals in a set time, pushing them constantly, relentlessly. It's chillingly similar to what Taylorism would later systematize.
And treating people purely as resources.
Worse, as fungible labor, interchangeable, replaceable parts, literally described as machines made out of men, women, and children. This early time is money idea was inherently violent because you couldn't quit, and this efficiency was enforced through brutality and the constant threat of being sold away from your family.
It really puts a different light on the origins of efficiency thinking. Which brings us then to Taylorism itself, that systematic approach to managing time in industry.
Right, Frederick Taylor's system. It took that quantification to an extreme, breaking down every single task into tiny, minute movements and measuring them sometimes down to thousands of a second for office tasks like how long it takes to settle paper or punch a time card.
Thousandths of a second. Wow.
Yeah. And this created a really sharp divide, didn't it? Between the people being timed and the people holding the stopwatch that timed in the timer. And often that division fell along, gendered and racial lines, devaluing certain kinds of work.
You can feel the alienation just hearing about it. Is there a modern equivalent?
Definitely. Think about a UPS driver today. Their truck is often kitted out with something called telematics.
Telematics, what's that? Sounds military.
It actually is a term from military remote control, originally. But here, it means intense digital surveillance. Sensors track everything. When the driver opens the door, backs up, hits the brake, how long they idle, if their seatbelt is buckled.
Every little thing.
Every little thing. There are even efficiency studies telling them which shirt pocket to use for his pen. It's about total control over movement and time.
That sounds incredibly stressful. Utterly soul-crushing, really. It makes me think of that Simpsons episode, the funny hat day one.
Huh. Yeah, I know the one. Marge tries to boost morale at the nuclear plant with funny hats.
And Mr. Burns declares it's working, while everyone is still miserable, sobbing, drinking.
It's actually a perfect analogy for how sometimes these superficial fixes get slapped onto really deep problems. The critique in the source material is that often, quote, slowness is invoked merely to make the machine of capitalism run faster. It's just a cosmetic fix.
Like putting a Band-Aid on a gaping wound, you're not actually addressing the real issue, just maybe making it look a bit better temporarily so things can keep running as they were.
Exactly. And that applies beyond just workplace morale, doesn't it? Think about the collapsing climate clock.
Yeah.
We need fundamental changes, not just funny hats for the planet. The Earth needs more than that.
That's a powerful connection. And it seems like this industrial mindset, this Taylorism, hasn't just stayed in the factory or the delivery truck. It's kind of seeped into our personal lives, too.
Massively. We've internalized it. Call it personal Taylorism. You see it everywhere in time management advice, right? All those books telling you to keep an ever more detailed log of your time, militantly eliminate distractions.
So instead of the boss timing you, you become your own time kipper, your own efficiency expert.
Precisely. It turns stealing time from your boss into stealing time from yourself as boss. You become your own overseer.
And that common saying, everyone has the same number of hours in the day, you're saying that's misleading.
It's called a patent mischaracterization in one source because it completely ignores different life circumstances, resources, demands on people's time. It feeds that whole bootstrapper ethos, the idea that if you just manage your 24 hours well enough, success is all on you.
Yeah, I see that. And then you get the rise of the productivity bros online.
Right. Promising you freedom from others if you just essentially recapitulate capitalism within your very person. Build your own little success factory through passive income or whatever.
While at the same time, actual workplaces are doubling down on surveillance. You mentioned those robo-manager systems.
Yeah, things like Insightful, it used to be called Work Pulse. Their own marketing boasts. Time is money. Discover exactly what your employees are up to every minute of the day. It's Taylorism supercharged by technology.
Even things like lean-in feminism, which obviously offers really valuable career advice for women, can sometimes unintentionally feed into this, can't it?
There's a risk, yeah. The sources suggest it can sometimes encourage women to be nimble like a corporation in all parts of life, potentially pummeling the life out of life by applying that optimization mindset everywhere.
It's like this competitive, measured approach starts really young. We're timed and graded constantly in school.
We absolutely are. We internalize those external benchmarks from day one. There's a great analogy used in the source material, the card game Asshole. You know it. Sometimes called president or scum or even capitalism.
Yeah, I think I've played it. The hierarchy changes each round.
Exactly. And it's described as a miniature version of structural inequality. Because if you're the asshole, the loser from the last round, you have to give your best cards to the president, the winner.
Right, so you start the next round already at a huge disadvantage.
Precisely. So when you inevitably lose again, nobody really knows, was it because you played badly, or was it just because you were set up to fail from the start? It makes it impossible to tell effort from circumstances.
And that connects directly to how society often views wealth and poverty, doesn't it? Reinforcing that idea that it's all on you, ignoring the structural factors.
It really does. And think about it globally. Multinational companies can just pick up and move jobs somewhere else if workers organize or demand better conditions. It shows how isolation is the harbinger of exploitation. When workers can't connect or act collectively, they have less power against this time-driven system.
Okay, so that's a pretty stark picture of how dominant this clock time quantitative view has become and some of its negative consequences. How do we even begin to push back or find alternatives? Where do we look?
Well, it often starts with just paying attention differently. Looking beyond the clock, one writer talks about the COVID lockdowns and suddenly noticing these small, slow changes that usually escape me, like watching a specific hill gradually turn yellow with mustard flowers over weeks.
Or seeing a single buckeye branch go through its whole cycle, budding, flowering, leaves turning, dying back, nature's time.
Exactly. Attuning ourselves to nature's own calendars. There's this beautiful observation of a red-breasted sapsucker woodpecker, how it registered time each day by adding to a dense pattern of holes on the same tree. The bird was literally turning the tree limb like a calendar.
A living calendar, that's a lovely image.
It leads to this really profound question the author asks. How can I translate, not in words, but in belief, that a river is a body as alive as you or I?
So moving away from seeing the world as just inert stuff, resources for us to use.
Right. And towards seeing it as an agential world, a world where things have their own life, their own purpose, where maybe mosses decide where to grow, where even rocks have lives in some sense. It challenges that whole mechanistic view.
And this isn't just a poetic idea, is it? You mentioned legal changes.
That's right. We're seeing actual legal precedents where non-human entities, Mount Taranaki in New Zealand, rivers in Bangladesh, even a lake system in Florida have been granted the same legal rights as a person, recognizing their inherent existence and value.
That's fascinating. It shifts the whole perspective. And there's this other concept mentioned, something called an unarrestable force.
Yeah, this one's a bit more elusive, described as a gestalt, a whole, that's more than its parts. It's this feeling of time outside time, something vast, interconnected, always unexpected and always fleeting, like a sudden awareness of the constant change running through everything.
Can you give an example?
The author shares a memory of watching a sunrise on Haleakala, the volcano. And the profound part wasn't just the visual spectacle of the sun, but this sudden, intense sensation of my mother's small, warm body next to her, years before, a timeless moment.
Ah, like those moments that just stick with you outside the normal flow.
Exactly. These are called kairotic events, these timeless, meaningful moments that kind of anchor us, giving Chronos, our everyday linear time, something solid to stand on. This restlessness and change that runs through all things, making them anew, that's the signature of it. The idea is that this deeper reality, this it, is always there, speaking back to you always, if you learn to listen.
Learning to listen. It sounds like learning a new language almost. A forbidden one, maybe, given how dominant clock time is. Have people actively resisted this imposed time?
Oh, definitely. In many different ways. You see it in Muslim countries insisting on using solar time for prayers, not just fixed clock hours. Or small communities like the Twin Oaks commune, deliberately setting their clocks an hour ahead of outside time, just to assert their own rhythm. Even the French, for a long time, refused to adopt Greenwich Mean Time.
Little acts of temporal rebellion.
Right, and sometimes terms that sound negative, like Filipino time or Indian time, often used dismissively to mean late by Western standards, were actually reappropriated as something that resists Western time. They became a sort of linguistic tool for navigating life according to different priorities, not just the clock.
That's a really interesting reclaiming of a stereotype.
It is. And there are even more powerful examples. Think about the Lakota people. During periods when their own ceremonies were banned, they would hold these incredibly long, elaborate dances on the 4th of July, ostensibly celebrating the American holiday under the banner of patriotism, but really using it to practice their own traditions and contain the symbolism of the holiday imposed on them.
Wow, that's clever. Using the system against itself.
And enslaved people, facing the most brutal time discipline imaginable, managed to create what the sources call black holes in the landscapes of ostensible total control.
How did they do that?
Often by using small plots of land as stolen time, time and space where they could cultivate their own crops, build relationships, engage in their own independent visions of self, family, and community. They developed their own social geographic grammars, ways of being and communicating time and space that were unintelligible to their enslavers, a deep form of resistance.
That's incredibly powerful. And this idea of different temporal centers connects to other experiences too, like crypt time.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Crypt time comes from the disability community. It describes a different relationship with time, one that often doesn't map onto standard schedules or timelines. It accepts a more vexed relationship to time and mortality, often meaning living more intensely in the present because the future can feel less predictable or controllable.
And you mentioned many people got a taste of that during the pandemic.
I think so, yes. When lockdowns threw schedules out the window, when the future felt uncertain for everyone, many able-bodied people experienced something closer to that feeling, time becoming more fluid, less rigidly structured.
So, shifting our perspective on time also means understanding different scales of time, like ecological time. You mentioned city time versus geological time.
Right. City time, our fast-paced daily life, often makes us forget the slower, deeper rhythms of the earth. We build in floodplains or on coastlines and forget about the long-term patterns of, say, debris flows after fires, or coastal erosion over decades.
Like the example of the fire deficit in California. The dense forests people thought were ancient weren't really like that historically.
Not entirely, no. That unbroken density wasn't immemorial. It was largely a result of suppressing the natural fire cycle and, crucially, banning the intentional low-intensity burning practices that indigenous peoples had used for centuries to manage the landscape.
So, stopping those practices created a kind of ecological imbalance.
Yes, it left a scar, as cultural as it was ecological. It changed the land's natural rhythm because a different, imposed time logic took over.
There are efforts to reconnect us with that longer term view, though, like that California King Tides project.
Yeah, that's a great example. It encourages people to go out during the highest tides of the year, the king tides, and take pictures. Snap the shore, see the future. The idea is to visualize what daily sea levels might look like with climate change.
Making the future feel more real, more immediate.
Exactly, to hopefully motivate us to stop burning fossil fuels. It connects our personal experience right now to that huge, slow-motion crisis of the collapsing climate clock. It's another way of saying the Earth needs real change, more than funny ads.
Which brings us back to community and connection. You mentioned mutual aid really surged during the pandemic. Was that just about filling gaps?
It was partly that, of course, filling gaps in the social safety net. But the sources argue it was something deeper, too. A concrete, living experiment in non-dominant ideas of value, responsibility, kinship, and deservedness. It was people enacting different ways of relating to each other outside the usual transactional logic, keeping those ideas alive.
And there's this insight that connection is a two-way street. That seems really key.
It is. The idea that people who move through a dead world, a world they see as just inert objects, are themselves less alive than they could be. Truly connecting with another person, or even, say, a river or a mountain, requires a balancing of power. It means you have to admit to two centers, your own and the others. It requires mutual recognition.
A shared time, a shared reality.
Yeah, and that leads to a final point about limits. Realizing that you, as one person, cannot be or do everything. Just like a life follows certain paths, not others, and eventually ends.
That sounds a bit scary.
Well, it can be seen as, in one sense, incredibly freeing. You're released from the pressure of infinite potential, infinite obligation. But, as the author notes, for anyone who actually enjoys being alive, acknowledging those limits is also inherently sorrowful.
Right. It's complex, both freeing and sad.
It's the reality of being finite beings living within these multiple layered kinds of time.
So this whole deep dive, it's shown how our standard idea of time, that clock on the wall, is really tangled up with history, economics, power structures, from monks to modern managers.
But it's also shown that other ways of experiencing time are possible. They're there in nature, in cultural resistance, in community connection. It's about maybe shifting from just that single imposed clock time
To something richer, more relational, more layered.
exactly, a more layered understanding.
So, as a final thought for you, the listener, maybe consider a place like a community library. Think about how all those different books, different subjects, disparate piles of information, maybe the story of an old house being moved back from a crumbling cliff, or that slow record of a buckeye branch changing through the year, how they somehow get into conversations on the shelves.
Or think about walking through a cemetery. Sometimes you see those urns shaped like books, holding the stories of lives that we can no longer open. What whispers of different rhythms, different connections, what stories of change become audible when we manage to pause that relentless external clock for a moment.
What do you start to notice when you just pay attention to the multi-layered time unfolding all around, even in places you might think are silent or mundane?